Apologies.
No problem. Okay. All right. Now we may have solved the problem and we do have a white microphone.
I begin.
Hey, our new IT person.
Start over.
There we go. From Christy. We're good.
Started out from the beginning.
Please start from, oh, I'll start over. Yeah. Good morning. Welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are going to be talking about the importance of old forests, and we welcome our first witness, Liz Thompson.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Liz Thompson from Williston, independent ecologist and associated with Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities Regional Conservation Initiative, and a member of the board of Northeast Wilderness Trust. In the past, I've worked with Vermont Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, the University of Vermont, and Vermont Fish and Wildlife. So I'd like to talk to you about old growth forests and old forests, what they are, why they're important, and how to protect them. First of all, we're going to talk about what is old growth. Do we need old growth and why? And managing for old growth characteristics. And we'll talk about wildlands as the future of old growth. So first of all, what is old growth? Old growth forests were the predominant land cover in our region prior to European settlement, covering approximately 90% of the land area. And you might hear different numbers from different studies. It's actually not completely known, but a good percentage of the land area was covered by old growth forests, recognizing, of course, that there were humans here, but nevertheless, the forests were quite different. And less than 0.1% of old growth forest remains today. This is what these images are from the Harvard Forest dioramas, which are lovely images. And in 1830, this is what the landscape in Western Massachusetts looked like, and in Vermont was beginning to look like this. 100 years later, by 1930, the agricultural clearing of the landscape had basically ended, and in large part, when the Midwest opened up and forests began to return to our landscape, which has presented an amazing opportunity for conservation in our region. The current forests, because of this history, the current forest age, most of our forests are ecologically young second growth forests. And if you look at a chart of forest succession over time, the current age of our forests is really in the middle of the age. An early forest here, older forest 500 years here, and our forests are in this middle age, and sometimes we call them teenage forests. So what is old growth forest? And you'll hear different definitions. If you go to a gathering of professionals in this field, you'll hear as many definitions as there are people in the room probably, but a common view of what old growth forests are is an old growth forest is one that has operated under natural ecological processes for a long time, for at least 3 to 4 centuries, with only minimal human activity. It's a really simple definition, simply continuity of process through time. Other terms that people sometimes use: primary forest, original forest, virgin forest, the forest primeval, ancient forest, and ancient woodland. Some of the attributes of old growth forests, some of them have trees of many, but not all. Forests have trees of many ages, some very large old trees, canopy gaps, down wood in all stages of decay, standing deadwood, tip-up mounds, mycorrhizal networks, abundant bryophytes, lichens, and fungi, and seeming disarray. And I'll show you these things. So trees of many ages. And this is a picture from Gifford Woods State Park in Killington. And you can see there's many old trees, very large trees, and very young trees.
Excuse me, Liz. Which of the documents we have from you are this presentation?
Do you know the name of the document that?
It's old growth forest.
Oh,
Can I ask one question?
May-
Is this just New England when you're talking about the definition of old forest?
Yes.
Okay.
Similar definitions apply elsewhere, but for the purposes of this is.
And I need to ask you a question, which is that you've chosen to use old growth forest. We usually say old forests.
I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, there's two different terms, and yeah, I'm going to talk about the definition of old forest.
Thank you.
So, but I wanted to introduce you to the concept of old growth forest, which is this sort of stricter term, but it's good background. So does everybody have the document that you need to be following along?
Do.
Okay, so trees of many ages, some very large old trees, that's a pencil held up to an old birch in an old growth forest. Canopy gaps, which are openings in the canopy naturally created through the falling of a single or a small number of trees. Down wood in all stages of decay. And that down wood is often, the down logs are often covered with moss, and they serve as nurse logs for young saplings, of young seedlings. These are seedlings of yellow birch getting started on a down log in an old growth forest. A lot of standing deadwood or snags, which provides a lot of habitat for a variety of species. Tip up mounds. When a tree falls, its root ball comes up out of the ground, and these tip up mounds are formed, which provide a great diversity of habitat. Vast, well-developed mycorrhizal networks, and these are the networks of the fungi. The underground part of a fungus is most of a fungus is underground, and those underground mycorrhizal networks are really important. We are learning so much more about this in the functioning of old forests. Abundant mosses, lichens, and fungi. This is a lichen called lung lichen, which is common in older forests. Chicken of the woods fungus, turkey tail, tinder fungus, many fungi found in old forests, and seeming disarray. And when Thoreau was describing his walk in the Maine woods, he called it mossy and moosey. I would say it's also messy. And this is something that, this is a photo that from Shelby Perry, who will speak in a few minutes. So old forest is what we've been asked to come talk about. And old forest has a slightly different definition. Old forests are biologically mature forests with some characteristics of old growth forests, exhibiting minimal evidence of human-caused disturbance. So old forests might not be what we think of as technically as old growth forests. In other words, many of them have not been without human disturbance for 3 or 4 centuries, but maybe more like 2 centuries or 150 years or something like that. But they're beginning to develop these characteristics of old growth forests. So that is really important. Old forests are on their way to being old growth forests. Other terms for old forests: over mature forests, that's a silvicultural term, decadent forest, and middle-aged forest are some of the other names for old forests. So and I am now going to talk about, do we need old growth? Do we need old forests? And I am now going to conflate those terms. So using those terms somewhat interchangeably. And just so you know, that's using those terms somewhat interchangeably, because with the understanding that old forests have those attributes of old growth forests and on their way to being old growth forests. So do we need them? And if so, why? This is an article that was published recently in Sierra Magazine, saying that the Northeast has few pre-colonial forests left. Expanding the remaining patches may hold the key to ecological resilience in the centuries to come. So the reasons that I think that we need, so I would say in my professional opinion, we do need old forests. We need them for the following reasons. One, they have inherent value as they were once the predominant land cover in our region. And I am giving actually 9 reasons, and I'm going to go through them one by one. So
Good. I was like, I can't read that fast.
don't worry. I'll do them one by one. Old forests have inherent value because they were once the predominant land cover in our region, but today cover less than 1%, less than 1/10%, really. Again, this is the same picture I showed you at the beginning. And so they simply have, in my view, inherent value as what was on the land before. 2, old forests provide ideal habitat for many species, such as Blackburnian warbler, barred owl, and certain lichens and mosses, among others. And the reason for that is because of all that structure that I was showing before, the downwood, the snags, the canopy gaps, all of these things provide habitat for some species. Some species prefer that habitat, those habitats. And these are species whose numbers have been documented to be higher in older or old growth forests. So this is a photo by Brian Pfeiffer of Blackburnian warbler. Lung lichen, as I showed you before, this is a lichen that is common in older forests, and it grows well on the trees that have the complex bark structure and the moisture holding capacity that this lichen needs. This lichen also needs clean air, and actually in some places it's used to some extent as an indicator of air quality. Necora moss is a moss that is more common on older trees and in old forests. And the Necora moss has a little bit of lung lichen growing within it. These things can be found in younger forests, but generally you'll see them on larger trees in younger forests. But they are to some extent preferentially growing in older forests. And the third thing is that the complexity of old forests creates a diversity of habitats, resulting in greater biological diversity. So again, it's this complexity. So here's a chart from a study that was done that looked at many other studies and compiled a bunch of data from different studies of numbers of species in forests of different ages. And you can see in this chart that, for example, the orange line is plants, and in very young forests, so young on the left and older on the right, very young forests, there's a high diversity of plants, and then it drops way down in the middle-aged forest, which is most of what we have now, and then rises back up as the forest ages. Similar with animals. Animals, high diversity at the beginning, lower in middle age, and then higher at the end. And fungi, is interesting, lower diversity at the beginning, and then higher number of species as the forest gets older, and it actually drops slightly as they get very, very old. Interestingly, because there are specific fungi that grow mostly in older forests. This is actually not a fungus. This is a slime mold, but I just thought it was just so nice growing in an old forest, but many people think of these as fungi. So also the fourth reason, deep duff layers and abundant downwood help these forests to serve better than younger forests to provide hydrological regulation. I know you've heard all about beaver, and this is part of this phenomenon of wood and in structure in streams, providing some hydrological regulation, slowing water down as it moves through the landscape, and particularly with high volume rain events that we're having now with climate change. And then the dynamic nature of old forests, fallen trees can provide protection for regeneration. Let me explain this for a minute. So I'm just looking out the window here, and I can see that some of the saplings in the forest here are browsed by deer. There are a lot of deer in Montpelier, and there are a lot of deer in the forests of Vermont. And you can see the deer browse in many forests that you go into. It actually prevents the regeneration of some species of trees, and it can be very severe in some places. But when you have the structure of fallen logs and down debris, it can actually provide protection for that regeneration. So it's a structural thing that allows the young seedlings and saplings to get started. And old forests store more carbon than younger forests, and much of that carbon is underground. We have Dr. Ali Kasiba here to talk about this. I don't need to say anything more about this, really. There are two publications. This one, Forest Carbon, which, by the way, any publications that I mentioned, we have multiple copies. If you want copies, we have them available for you. So this is the Forest Carbon publication. I've got a pile of them over there. And then on the right is a guide to forest carbon in the Northeast, which is Dr. Kasiba's guide, which is really a wonderful publication. You've got that in your documents for this morning. But in the Forest Carbon one, there's this clock on the right-hand side that shows that in the outer ring here of the clock, shows the accumulation of carbon as the forest ages, and you can see it increases with time as time goes on to 400, 500 years. The rate of sequestration, and Dr. Kasiba will explain this, tends to be higher in younger forests and then levels off or decreases. But I'll let her talk more about that. With their complex structure, diversity of microhabitats, diversity of species, dense carbon, and healthy aquatic systems, old forests are in many ways more resilient to climate change than younger forests. And many scientists recognize this. The other eighth reason, old growth forests can serve as reference sites to help us better understand how forests actually work. I don't know if you can see it in this photo, but these large trees in the Battelle Research Forest in Ripton have numbers on them because they are being studied over time, so that we can use old forests to help us understand how forests work and how they function.
Is that Ripton or Middlebury?
Hmm?
Is that Ripton or Middlebury?
Excuse me. Representative Sheldon,
I didn't know that.
Pride here.
Middlebury.
Thank you.
Did you recognize a tree or what?
Absolutely, I know those trees. Those trees.
Thank you for the correction. Great. And then old forests offer humans places of refuge and mental and physical recharge. They inspire awe and a sense of wonder. And Barbara Kingsolver said it well. People need wild places. They need to be able to taste grace and know once again that we desire it. So just being in an old forest inspires awe. Also, there's lots of good evidence that being in forests is literally good for mental health, improves mental health, and in some cases improves physical health. There's lots of studies on this, and particularly in older forests. So those are the reasons that I think we do need old forests and old growth forests. And then how do we get there? How do we get to more old forests on the landscape? Well, we can manage for old growth forest characteristics. And again, there's a publication that we have here by Paul Catanzaro of the University of Massachusetts and Tony D'Amato, University of Vermont, restoring old growth characteristics. And again, we have copies of this. So this talks about, this is a great publication actually for you, and you've got it in your stuff, your documents for this morning. But it's a great publication because it talks about what old growth forest is and what the characteristics are before it talks about how to restore those characteristics. And it talks about, and here's the document, It talks about, you can yeah, you have this and you can also get it online. It talks about two different sort of ways or a spectrum of ways to get to more old growth forest on the landscape. It talks about an active pathway to old forest, managing for old growth forest characteristics. And then, and here's a timeline of how that works, that you can say the age of many forests in New England and New York is in the 100-year or so range. And if you want to develop old growth characteristics through active management, you can do that and get some old growth characteristics in a relatively short period of time through activity in the forest. And so you reach certain benchmarks, which the publication talks about. Or there's the passive pathway to old forests, which is simply waiting and letting nature take its course. It takes a little bit longer, and the old growth forest characteristics develop on their own through natural ecological processes. So these are two possible ways to get there, and the active management, and if you need to manage a forest or if you want to manage a forest, you can prioritize areas, for example, if you want to get some of these with drainage problems. You know, say there's gullies, ditches, culverts that are undersized, or other legacies in the forest, legacies of intensive management that you'd like to correct. That can be done. Active management you can do active management. If you have a plantation of non-native species and you want to change the composition of that forest, you might want to do some active management in that case. Or if you have high concentrations of invasive species or very high deer densities, those are places where you might want to do some active management. So, for example, in the high deer density area, you might want to create some of that structure quickly to protect the regeneration. But my philosophy, my professional philosophy is that we need forests. We absolutely need forests, but forests don't need us. Forests do better at restoring themselves by themselves over time, allowing natural ecological processes to do the work. So in most cases, that is the best. That is a way forward. That is a way to get old growth forest characteristics, which takes a little more time. But the advantage is nature is the manager. We don't have to make decisions. Ecological processes prevail, and the natural things that are going to happen, windstorms, ice storms, flooding, insects, disease, these things are going to play out. And what we do know is that we will have we are going to have, as the climate changes and as we live with the legacies of the past, we will have novel ecological communities going forward as time goes on. We're not going to recreate or have again the forests of 400, 500 years ago on this landscape. In some places we might, but for the most part, our forests are and will change. Species composition will change with climate change. So that is to be expected. We have non-native species. We don't know how they will behave. But with the exception of places that really need some active restoration, it's really just fine to leave the forest alone and let it restore itself. However, there of course are situations where you want to manage, or you, for legal reasons, you need to, or other reasons. And so the idea that wildlands, passive management, is a way forward, leads me to talk about wildlands as the future of old growth. So this study, Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities, which came out in 2017, is the regional vision that I was talking about, that calls for protection of a large portion of New England's landscape, about 10% of it in old forest conditions or as wildland. So 10% as wildland and about 60% as managed forest land. So actively managed forest land, but managed with ecological forestry in mind. Another quite more recent publication is Beyond the Illusion of Preservation, which I also have copies of here, if you're interested. And this talks about the balance of getting the wood that we need and getting what we need from the forest, and also managing for these old forest characteristics. So the balance, how do we achieve that balance? And it's a really great study that really crunches a lot of numbers and gives some guidance on how we can achieve these things in the New England landscape. And of course, you have heard about Vermont conservation design. Perhaps, as someone has said, perhaps the most important thing you'll hear about is this vision for Vermont. And you've got a poster on the wall, this vision for the future of Vermont. And this vision has a very similar goals and nests within the regional vision by calling for protection of approximately 9 to 10% of the landscape as old forest over time, with not necessarily a requirement that be passively managed right away, but with multiple pathways to get there. So slightly different approach. But this is Vermont conservation design is very important. It is the underpinning of much of the other work that you have done here in the legislature, and that will continue. So I'm glad that you've had a presentation on that. In 2022, this report, Wildlands in New England, came out, which, again, we have some copies of. We have an executive summary, many copies of the executive summary that we can give you of this report, and say a little bit about what this is. So it talks about wildlands and wildlands as the future of old forest. And wildlands are tracts of any size and current condition that are permanently protected from development, in which management is explicitly intended to allow natural ecological processes to prevail with free will. And it recognizes that humans have been part of this landscape for millennia and can coexist within and with wildlands. So for some examples from throughout New England, starting on the right, Baxter State Park is the largest wildland in New England. A tiny place, Muddy Pond, a small preserve in suburban Massachusetts, near Plymouth, Massachusetts. Beautiful natural area owned by Northeast Wilderness Trust. Monhegan Island in Maine, much of that is protected as wildland. And Colchester Bog in Vermont is a smallish example of a wildland permanently protected by the University of Vermont. So we found in the study, the findings of the study basically are that 81% of New England is forest, and that 3.3% of it is wildland. And in Vermont, we're a little bit higher than that, a little bit higher in Vermont. But if you zoom in, and I won't attempt to do that, but if you look at this map just from a distance, you can see that many of the wildlands in Vermont are in the spine of the Green Mountains. They're federal wilderness areas and state properties, state forests in large part. And then in New Hampshire, similarly, and there's Baxter in Maine. And at this scale, it's actually hard to see anything in eastern Massachusetts, but there are a few places, as the one I showed you. And then the Berkshires have some wildlands. So what you notice, however, so we've got good representation of wildlands. For example, the top of Mount Mansfield is protected as wildland. Again, it's a natural area protected by the University of Vermont. And then we have some lowland wildlands and old forests. This is a black gum swamp in Vernon in the southeastern corner of Vermont. Little tiny pocket swamps that are very old black gum trees, which is a rare species in Vermont. And part of this complex of swamps is protected as wildland, and part of it is not.
Sorry, where is that one?
In Vernon, yeah, it's just south of Brattleboro.
I haven't met those trees yet,
You haven't met those trees yet?
like the ones in Middlebury.
I'll give you an opportunity. But this kind of forest, this is a forest that we see a lot of in, say, in the Champlain Valley. These are white trilliums in your neck of the woods. I'm sure you see this. This photo was actually taken in Colchester. And this is an area that is protected, but it's not old forest yet. It will be in the future. And so, but what we are missing when you look at the overall map of the wildlands, you'll see that we're actually missing this kind of landscape. We have lots of high elevation, we have some low elevation, but we have lots of high elevation, steep places, inoperable places, mountaintops, not a lot of lowland represented in the wildlands. And we are working on that, and Shelby Perry will tell you more. I want to point you now to From the Ground Up, which is online publication of quarterly publication of wildlands, woodlands, farmlands, and communities. And I have postcards if you're interested in that. Encourage you to look at that because it addresses many of these topics that I've been talking about. The upcoming issue will be on ecological forestry, a series of articles on ecological forestry and how that can fit into this whole picture. So that is all I have for formal comments. I don't know if you'd like to take questions from me right now, or would you like to wait until the next speaker?
I would like to do a little of both. So I want to make sure that if folks have specific questions for Liz Thompson, we have time for that now. And then Liz, feel free, because you know more about what's coming next than we do, to just say, that's a better question for another presenter. Do members have questions for Liz? Representative Tagliaferri.
The first few slides, one shows, it says Harvard Forest Diorama 1700. Then the next one was 18. Do we know what the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was back then versus what it is now? And can level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today support old growth forests?
Dr.
Yes.
Kasiba, thank you.
Yes, we do have estimates of carbon dioxide back then. We use proxies. We didn't have instrumentation measuring carbon dioxide. No one was thinking about that, but we use other things. Actually, we use tree rings as a proxy. We use ice cores, some other methods, so we can sort of estimate. Right now, actually, we have higher carbon dioxide concentrations in the air. We are seeing that act as a fertilization effect for trees, meaning that it's easier for trees to absorb that carbon dioxide. That's what they use in photosynthesis to make food, sugars. And so we are seeing, all things being equal, if they have enough water, if they have enough nutrients, that increase in carbon dioxide can actually make trees grow bigger and grow more. So that part of the change in our climate is actually beneficial for trees. There's, of course, many other aspects of our changing climate that are not beneficial that end up sort of canceling out some of those benefits from the increased carbon dioxide. Does that help?
I think so. Can you
Okay.
give us an example of some of the downsides?
Well, so Dr. Kasiba is one of the people who's going to present.
Yeah,
Oh.
although I won't get too much into climate change impacts in my talk.
Okay.
Well, I guess a little bit inadvertently to talk about how old forests can help us with some of those things, but yeah, I'm happy to talk more
Okay.
about that.
Any
Yeah.
questions
Thanks.
about carbon might be
Better to wait.
good to.
Representative Pritchard.
Slide 42, it was the slide with the the up and down slide starting from the new growth to old growth forest.
This one?
That's the one.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I mean, what animal, you're not talking about all animals, plants and fungi, are you? Are you talking about a specific
This,
percentage of?
this is what's called a meta-analysis. It's analysis of analyses. So these authors took a bunch of different studies from Europe and North America I don't know if Asia was, but anyway, a large geographical area and assembled a bunch of, so I couldn't tell you which animal groups are represented here, but these are very, very broad groups, but so many species, and I can't tell you specifically.
Yeah, I guess my question is what percentage of the overall species is at that top tier there? Okay.
I see your question.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, are there?
I mean,
species-
obviously, different species thrive in many of these things. And there's many that thrive here that don't here.
Yeah,
So
yes.
out of
There
that
are
whole
different-
group,
Right, there's different species on the right than on the left. Is that
Right.
what you're getting
That's-
at?
that's what I am
That's
getting at.
that's exactly right, and I can't tell you which,
Okay.
but it's a very rich study with lots of detail in it, and I can look back at it for you and see if I can discern some of those nuances. These are just generalized, very generalized results.
Okay.
And within this study, I chose this summary chart. There's like a whole page of charts like this for different groups.
That's a segue to the question that I have for you, which is the increased kind of frequency of microburst windstorm events. It seems like we're getting nature's restoring some of this diversity, perhaps through changes to our climate that are increasing these wind events. I guess I'm curious if you've thought about that and how it's playing out in the landscape in New England.
Yeah, and it's, of course, there's so much we don't know, but the increase in these microburst wind events and disturbance of the forest is for biodiversity is a really good thing. It creates structural complexity in the forest. It creates early successional habitat, which is something that is also in shorter supply than it might have been previously, and that some managers are working to increase young forest habitat. But some of that is happening naturally through natural ecological processes. So that's what, in a sense, that is the middle-aged forest that we have now is so uniform and not structurally complex, that's what managers are interested in, creating the old forest for its benefits and the young forest for its benefits to certain species through either active or passive management. But nature did, prior to our being here, in great number, humans being around in great numbers, nature did that, created that diversity of habitats. But yes, that is changing and increasing as the climate changes.
Representative Sakowicz, then Austin.
Yeah, getting to continuing with the young forester a bit and kind of connecting to our presentation yesterday. Do we have a sense of, before Europeans were here, what the role of beavers were in creating young forests in our area?
You had all the experts in, and I'm not an expert in that, but my understanding is that yes, beaver were important in creating a diversity of habitats, including young forest, prior to European settlement, and their numbers, of course, have changed over time due to trapping, and then now increase again. So
Representative Austin.
Yep. I'm assuming there's a tension between the timber industry and maintaining old forests. Just out there kind of understandings between the two in terms of how to kind of preserve old forests and allow the timber industry to operate,
coexist.
coexist. Thank you.
yeah, what I really would love to see and hope for is that we are all collaborating and all looking at the same goals. So when people talk about, there are forest managers who that I have heard speak who believe that all forests need to be managed actively in some way, and that's one area where there might be some different points of view. That some feel that all forests need to be managed, and there are others who feel that not all forests need to be managed. And I I don't know anyone who believes that no forest should be managed or that no tree should ever be cut. I mean, perhaps there are people with those beliefs as well, but it's really, I mean, the common ground is that we all use wood, right, for a variety of purposes. And we all need the forest. Forests don't need us, but we need the forests. And so the balance is, you know, to what extent we need to manage or not. Yes, there are tensions. There surely are. And my sincere hope is that we can all find common ground and collaborate on a unified vision of conservation that includes some wildlands, some passive management, to perhaps 10% of the landscape, some active management which is done in a responsible manner that protects water quality, that protects the structural complexity of forests. And then there's, of course, a portion of the landscape that is devoted to agriculture and a portion of the landscape that is devoted to urban settlement and so forth. But this integrated approach to conservation is really what I hope we can all move toward. It's aspirational, I suppose.
And I would just say, Liz has left us quite a number of documents to review on our webpage for today, and the vision that's put forth in Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands Communities is sort of talking about a resilient landscape for New England, both from food production and forestry production perspective, as well as a biodiversity conservation and enhancement perspective. So I highly recommend checking that out. And I would also just say one thing that's become apparent to me in talking about forests and forest management and our relationship to our forests over the years is we tend to go to the forests that are near us. I know the forests in Middlebury pretty well. And in Addison County, we're blessed to have a real combination of heavily managed forests, lighter managed forests, and wilderness areas. And being aware of the forest that you spend most of your time in, and then visiting other forests is really just a great personal edification thing that I highly recommend. And if anyone wants to visit the older forests in Addison County, I'm always available for that.
One more item on that is that in September, there will be a conference on old growth forests, which will be held in Ripton. I'm pretty sure it's in Ripton up the road.
It is in Ripton.
In the third week of September. So if you're interested in that.
And
Touch.
that's this year or next year?
This fall, yes.
Representative Logan.
Yes, could we please get information about that?
Yes, I will. We'll forward that information.
All right, members, we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back at the top of the hour with our next witness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.